It is said that before the world learned how to shout, it learned how to listen. Before iron rang against iron, before banners rose and fell, there was a shoreline where the air itself felt heavier with meaning. The sea breathed slowly there, touching stone with the patience of centuries. And upon that stone once stood a structure that did not glitter like a palace, nor threaten like a fortress. It waited, it listened, it remembered. In the opening hush of this story, we drift toward that ancient coast, Alexandria, not as it appears on maps, but as it exists beneath the veil of time. The moon is low, the lamps are few, and somewhere between salt and shadow, a question rises like smoke from a dying flame. Did knowledge truly burn? Or did it simply learn how to sleep? The Library of Alexandria is often spoken of as a ruin, a tragedy, a wound in history. But tonight, we approach it differently. Not as a place that ended, but as a presence that inhaled, exhaled, and became something quieter. A breathing absence. A chamber where echoes still circle, though no walls remain to hold them. Imagine walking toward it slowly. Each step stirs dust that once was papyrus, papyrus that once held words, words that once held worlds. Scrolls were stacked there not as possessions, but as offerings. They came from everywhere, carried by travelers who believed that language was sacred cargo, from distant deserts and river kingdoms, from islands marked by stars, from empires already beginning to forget themselves. Every ship that entered the harbor was asked to surrender its texts, not in conquest, but in reverence. Originals were kept, copies were returned. Knowledge here was meant to stay. It is said that within those halls, silence had texture, that even breath softened itself. Scholars moved slowly, as though walking through a temple rather than a storehouse, because words were not tools to them. They were gates. Each sentence a threshold, each symbol a quiet key. Oil lamps flickered against stone, shadows stretched like listening figures along the walls, and in the spaces between shelves, something unseen lingered, a shared understanding that what was gathered here could not be owned, only tended. Papyrus became dust, dust became memory, memory became a veil. As the night deepens, we wander those halls not through certainty, but through imagination. No single map survives to guide us. No inventory tells us exactly what was held, and perhaps that is part of the mystery's design. Some accounts speak of mathematical texts that mapped the heavens long before telescopes dared to look. Others whisper of medical knowledge too gentle for its time, philosophies too patient, histories written not by victors, but by observers. There are rumors, always rumors, of star-marked diagrams, of oceanic maps that knew the shape of distant shores, of symbols that spiraled inward instead of pointing outward. But history, like firelight, flickers. One story tells of Julius Caesar's ships burning in the harbor, flames leaping accidentally into the library's reach. Another speaks of later centuries, of religious zeal, of deliberate erasure. Still others insist there was no single destruction at all, only a slow forgetting, shelf by shelf, generation by generation, as priorities shifted and silence crept in like ivy. Contradictions emerge gently here. They do not clash, they overlap, like waves arriving from different moons. Histories refuse to agree on how the silence arrived, and so we listen to them all, without asking them to resolve themselves. Because perhaps the library did not fall in one night of smoke and panic. Perhaps it dimmed. Perhaps its lamps went out one by one, until the last scholar closed a door without realizing they were the last to do so. There is a particular sorrow in that thought. Not the grief of sudden loss, but the ache of something too vast to be noticed as it slips away. Too important to be held by flame alone, too alive to truly die. It is said that some texts were never meant to survive daylight, that certain words change when exposed too often. That mystery, like breath, requires shadow to remain whole. And so the idea emerges, softly, without insistence, that not everything gathered in Alexandria was meant to be read forever. Some knowledge is seasonal, some truths bloom only once, some wisdom withdraws when the world grows loud. Beneath the silence, beneath the ash, something else begins to form, a different kind of library, one without walls, one without shelves. When papyrus turned to dust, it did not vanish. Dust settles, it drifts, it moves with air and footstep and wind, it travels. And so, perhaps, did the essence of those words, fragments carried into other minds, ideas copied imperfectly, then transformed, echoes embedded in later philosophies, later sciences, later myths, not preserved, but dissolved, like salt in water. The library may have ceased to exist as a place, but it may have continued as a breath, exhaled into the collective memory of humanity, waiting, patient, unnamed. Consider this. How many ideas feel ancient without us knowing why? How many insights arrive with the sensation of remembering rather than learning? How many truths feel older than language itself? Perhaps you have felt it, that quiet certainty that does not announce its source. Whispers tell us that the greatest loss of Alexandria was not the destruction of scrolls, but the shattering of context. The way knowledge once sat together, astronomy beside poetry, mathematics beside myth, medicine beside music. No separation, no hierarchy, only understanding as a whole, breathing system. When the library faded, knowledge scattered. It specialized, it forgot how to sit in the same room with wonder, and yet something remained. Beneath the silence, beneath centuries of retelling, the idea persists that the library was never meant to be permanent, that it was a gathering, not a vault, a moment in which humanity tried briefly to listen to itself. And then, like all moments, it passed. The shoreline is quiet now. Waves continue their ancient work. Moonlight traces paths where footsteps once moved slowly, carefully. There are no pillars standing, no doors to open, only air, carrying particles of what once was. Perhaps the library still breathes beneath the ash, not as stone and scroll, but as a reminder that knowledge is not something we keep, it is something that visits, and when the time is right, it leaves again. Some voices only echo when we are quiet enough to hear them. Some libraries close their doors not because they are destroyed, but because they have already given us everything we were ready to receive. And so the question remains, unanswered and gentle, as sleep draws near. Did the knowledge burn, or did it simply learn how to sleep? The answer does not hurry. It waits, marked by the moon, carried on breath, resting where memory fades into dream. It is said that the sea keeps its own libraries, not of paper and ink, but of weight and silence, of stone softened by centuries, of names dissolved into salt. And if you listen closely, in the hour when the world is almost asleep, you can feel how the ocean remembers. Tonight, we begin beneath moonlit water. The surface above us trembles like a thin veil, a living skin of starlight. Far below, where light becomes a slow blue hush, columns sleep in a long, unbroken stillness. They rise from sand like the ribs of something ancient, something once alive. Seaweed drifts around them like forgotten robes. Fish pass through broken arches as though swimming through a dream. No city is named yet, because some places arrive first as feeling, a pull in the chest, a softness behind the eyes, a memory that does not belong to you, yet somehow knows your breath. And so we drift, slowly, as if carried on an oceanic lullaby, toward the outline of a place that might never have existed, and yet refuses to disappear. Whispers tell us that long ago there was a city beyond the familiar edge of the world, a city ringed with water and shining stone, a place that rose like a promise, orderly, radiant, proud, but the whispers do not tell us whether it was built by hands or by imagination, or by the sacred need of humans to explain why the earth sometimes swallows what we love. Only later does a name rise to the surface: Atlantis. But even that name feels like a shell held to the ear. It contains the sound of something larger, older tides, a deeper echo. It is said that Plato carried the story to us, not as a historian with ledgers, but as a philosopher with a lantern. He speaks of Atlantis in his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, as if repeating a tale passed down through chambers of memory. A story told to Solon, the Athenian lawgiver, by priests in Egypt, priests who claimed their records were older than Greek remembrance. And so the tale reaches us through layers of voice and time, like moonlight passing through many veils. Some believe this means Atlantis was real. Some believe it means Atlantis was never meant to be real. And in this quiet chapter, we do not rush to decide. We simply sit beside the water and listen. Because whether Atlantis was stone or symbol, it carries the shape of a warning carved in gentle metaphor. Plato describes a civilization of abundance, a kingdom blessed by the sea, cradled by fertile land, touched by the favor of gods. The city, he says, was planned in rings, circles of land and water nested like spirals, as if the place itself was designed to mirror the patterns of the heavens. There were canals like silver threads, harbors filled with ships, temples where incense rose like breath toward the stars. And at the heart of it all, a sacred center, a place of power and remembrance. And yet, the deeper Plato speaks, the more the tale begins to shimmer with something darker. Not evil, not drama, but a quiet swelling, a sacred arrogance, a civilization that once listened to the world, and then slowly began to hear only itself. It is said that Atlantis grew strong, wealthy, admired. And as it grew, it forgot the soft boundaries that keep a soul awake. It forgot humility. It forgot that the sea gives and takes without anger, without apology. It forgot that sunlight is not a possession. And so the story shifts, like the tide turning in its sleep. Plato tells us that Atlantis reached outward, that it sought to expand its influence, to gather more than it needed. And then, in one night of earthquakes and floods, the island sank into the sea and disappeared. A simple sentence, almost too simple, like a door closing without a sound. But if you sit with it, if you let the words settle, something begins to stir. Because the image is immense, a whole city swallowed, temples drowned, streets erased, a civilization folded under the ocean like a blanket pulled over a sleeping child. And the stars above watched, unchanged. Some believe the sinking is literal, a true memory of catastrophe, perhaps a volcanic eruption, a great earthquake, a tsunami that arrived like a sudden oceanic breath. Some point to the ancient destruction of Thera, Santorini, where the Minoan world was shaken by fire and wave. Some look farther west, toward submerged landscapes near Spain, or toward the Azores, or toward distant continental shelves that once rose higher when the seas were lower. Others believe Atlantis is not a location at all, but a mirror, a story shaped to teach Athens, and all who would listen, about pride, excess, and the fragile thinness of civilization's skin. And perhaps it is both. Because sometimes myth is the only way history can be told when the facts are too vast, too drowned, too scattered. Beneath the silence, the sea keeps its counsel. It does not confirm, it does not deny, it simply holds. And yet, the strange thing about Atlantis is not that it might have sunk. The strange thing is how many different shores remember something like it. In forgotten corners of the earth, there are stories of drowning worlds. In Mesopotamian memory, a great flood washes away the old age of humanity, leaving only a few to begin again. In the Hebrew tradition, waters rise to cleanse the earth. In Greece, Deucalion survives a flood sent by the gods. In India, a sacred fish warns Manu of coming waters, guiding him toward survival. Among many indigenous peoples, there are echoes of land swallowed by the sea, of ancestors crossing waters that were once plains, of coastlines shifting like dreamscapes. These myths do not match. They do not align neatly like bricks, but they overlap like constellations. They suggest that somewhere behind human storytelling, the earth has spoken in water more than once. That memory carries catastrophes not always as dates, but as symbols. That the sea has taken cities, villages, forests, whole stretches of world, and left behind only the feeling of sudden loss. Atlantis, then, becomes a gathering point, a name pinned to a vast oceanic ache, a way of saying something was here, and then it wasn't. And in that absence, humans do what they have always done. They imagine, they search, they look out across moonlit waves and ask the darkness to answer. Some explorers have chased Atlantis like a lantern in fog. They have scanned the ocean floor. They have studied ancient texts like star maps. They have listened to cliffs and ruins and underwater ridges, hoping the earth might confess. And sometimes the sea offers strange gifts. A submerged wall, a sunken road, a city drowned by rising water after an earthquake. We find ancient ports swallowed by coastal shifts. We find temples that slipped beneath waves. We find entire neighborhoods beneath lakes, forgotten when dams rose and valleys filled. These discoveries are real. They are tender reminders that land is not stable and that human footprints do not last as long as we wish. But none of them confirms Atlantis. And perhaps that is the point. Perhaps Atlantis is meant to remain just beyond certainty, not to frustrate us, but to keep the story alive in the place where wonder lives best. Because certainty is loud, and Atlantis is quiet. If we return to the image at the beginning, columns under moonlit water, we can feel something deeper than curiosity. There is melancholy here, not sharp grief, but a slow sadness, like a song heard through walls. The sadness of a civilization that may have fallen not to punishment, but to forgetting how to listen. To listen to what? To the sea, to the earth, to the limits of human desire, to the sacred whisper that says, enough. In Plato's telling, Atlantis was once partially divine, ruled by descendants of Poseidon, balanced between human impulse and godlike order. But over time, the divine portion dimmed, and the human portion swelled. And with that swelling came distortion, a drift away from harmony. Whether this is literal genealogy or symbolic language does not matter tonight. What matters is the feeling it carries, that civilizations do not always collapse from invasion or war. Sometimes they collapse from within, from a subtle loss of reverence, from forgetting the quiet agreements between people and place, from building too high without bowing low. Atlantis becomes a soft parable, told in oceanic imagery. A city that rose and then sank, not merely in water but in spirit, and still the dream persists. Why? Because Atlantis speaks to the part of us that senses history is full of hidden rooms, that beneath the surface of what we are taught, there are other stories, veiled, buried, star-marked, waiting for the right silence. Atlantis offers implied forbidden knowledge, not as a secret map we can steal, but as a question we can carry. What have we forgotten about ourselves? Not facts, not dates, but ways of being. It is said that there are times when the sea is unusually calm, like glass laid gently across the world. And in those moments, some claim they have seen shapes beneath, lines too straight to be natural, shadows too patterned to be stone alone. They speak of a feeling that rises without reason, a sudden heaviness, as if the water is guarding something sacred. Most of these claims dissolve under scrutiny, and yet the feeling remains. Because human beings do not only seek Atlantis for proof, they seek it for longing, for the idea that something magnificent once existed and still might, somewhere, beneath the waves of time. That beauty can vanish and still be real. That loss does not erase meaning. And perhaps that is the final gift of this drowned city, not an answer, but an atmosphere, a dream we return to when we sense our own world growing too proud, too fast, too certain. As this chapter begins to fade, imagine the city once more, not in daylight, not in documentaries, not in heated argument, but in the gentle hush of night. Stone streets shimmer beneath imagined currents. Temples stand in the dark water like sleeping mountains. Statues wear coral crowns. Fish glide through what were once doorways, carrying small lanterns of motion. And above it all, the moon watches. The stars watch. They watched then, if Atlantis was real. They watch now, as the story continues. Perhaps Atlantis sank in one night of Earth's trembling breath. Perhaps it never existed as a place at all. Perhaps it exists only as a mirror, showing each era what it risks losing when it builds without humility. And perhaps it was never meant to be found, because it was meant to be remembered, not with certainty, but with reverence. So we let the city fade again into dark water, where memory softens and edges dissolve. We do not chase it with nets of proof. We simply allow it to drift in the oceanic chamber of the mind, marked by the moon, carried by the slow tide of sleep. Because some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and some cities are meant to remain beneath the surface, not to hide from us, but to keep us gentle. It is said there is an hour that does not belong to morning or night, a thin, breath-held moment when the sky forgets its color and the earth grows still as if listening for its own name. In that hour, mist gathers low over open land and the world feels unfinished, suspended between what was and what will be. It is there, in that dawnless twilight, that the stone circle waits, not rising, not declaring, only standing. Stones older than names emerge slowly from the pale veil, their edges softened by time, their weight pressing gently into the sleeping ground. Stonehenge does not appear as a monument in this light. It arrives as a question, one carved not in language, but in patience. The air around the circle feels different. Sound thins. Even the wind seems to hesitate, as though unsure whether it is welcome to pass through. You step closer, not with your feet, but with your attention. And the stones respond by doing nothing at all. They have been here longer than memory dares to reach. Before iron, before writing, before history learned how to keep count. When they were raised, the land itself was younger, the sky closer, the stars brighter with intention. It is said that hands shaped these stones without metal, that people carried them across impossible distances using ropes of fiber and will, guided not by machines, but by rhythm, breath timed to breath, footstep to footstep. Each movement was a vow, each pause a prayer. No single generation could claim the work. The circle rose slowly, like a chant passed from parent to child, from elder to apprentice, from bone to dust. Some placed the stones, others aligned them, others returned only to watch, and perhaps that was enough. Whispers tell us that Stonehenge was never meant to be understood all at once, that its meaning unfolded like a long inhale stretched across centuries, that those who began it knew they would not see its end, and built anyway. This too is a kind of knowledge. As mist curls around the stones, you notice how silence behaves differently here. It does not feel empty, it feels held, as though the circle gathers quiet and refuses to let it scatter. Stand within it, and your thoughts slow. Not because you are instructed to be calm, but because the space itself seems uninterested in hurry. Time does not vanish here. It softens. Stonehenge has often been asked to explain itself. Was it a calendar? A temple? A burial ground? An observatory? A ritual site? These questions arrive with sharp edges, and the stones receive them without reply. Yes, there are alignments. The sun rising at midsummer, the long shadows of winter solstice, the way light slips through certain gaps at certain moments, like a remembered gesture. But these are mentioned only as whispers, never as conclusions, because the alignments do not feel like calculations. They feel like acknowledgements, as if the builders were not measuring the sky, but greeting it. Some believe the stones were placed to count time. Others sense they were placed to witness it, to stand still while the world moved, to remind those who entered the circle that motion does not require dominance. Notice how the stones do not point, they encircle. They do not divide the land into before and after. They gather it into now. Beneath the silence, there is restraint. Forbidden knowledge does not live here as hidden text or sealed chamber. It lives as something withheld, something known but not spoken aloud, something felt deeply enough that language would only reduce it. Perhaps the builders understood something we have since misplaced, that not all understanding improves when it is explained. The stones are massive, yet they do not overwhelm. They loom, but they do not threaten. Their power is quiet, earned through stillness rather than force. Imagine the people who stood here long ago. They did not arrive as tourists. They arrived as participants. They brought offerings that did not survive. Breath, voice, movement, intention. Fires burned low. Drums may have sounded not loudly, but steadily, like a second heartbeat beneath the earth. Children would have learned to lower their voices here without being told why. Elders would have spoken slowly, if at all, because the circle did not belong to individuals. It belonged to the land, and to whatever listens when humans grow quiet. Bones have been found here, ashes too, but the site resists being claimed as a place of death. It feels instead like a place of transition, a threshold where one state of being loosens and another gathers, not an ending, a turning. As centuries passed, the builders disappeared into dust. Languages shifted, beliefs rearranged themselves, empires rose and fell like waves on distant shores, and still the stones remained. Storms struck them, frost cracked them, sun warmed them, rain traced slow paths along their faces, yet they did not collapse inward, they did not crumble into chaos. They waited. There is something unsettling in that patience, because it reminds us how temporary our urgency is. Stonehenge has outlived the reasons given for it, outlived the stories told about it, outlived the hands that once knew exactly why each stone stood where it did. And yet, it does not feel abandoned. It feels complete, perhaps because it does not demand interpretation. It allows it and then releases it. Stand among the stones long enough, and questions begin to dissolve. Not answered, simply softened. The mind stops grasping for meaning and begins to sense something else, a shared rhythm between breath and ground. The stones seem to listen, not to words, to presence. It is said that when the wind passes through the circle at night, it changes tone, that it moves more slowly, as though brushing against memory, that it carries echoes not of voices, but of pauses, the spaces between chants, the silence after ritual ends. Where memory fades, the stones remain. They do not record events, they record attention. Some believe Stonehenge was built to mark the sky. Others feel it was built to mirror the inner landscape, a way of arranging the world so that humans could remember their place within it. Not above, not below, but inside the turning of seasons, inside the breath of the earth, inside the long spiral of time that does not rush. And so the circle measures breath, not time. It measures how long you can stand without speaking, how deeply you can inhale without wanting, how much you can feel without naming. In a world that demands explanation, Stonehenge offers refusal, and that refusal is gentle. It does not close itself off. It simply remains what it is, stone, space, silence, and trusts that this will be enough. As night deepens, the mist thins. Stars begin to pierce the sky, one by one, as if remembering their places. The stones cast long shadows that overlap and dissolve, forming shapes that vanish before they can be held. The circle breathes with the dark. Nothing changes, and yet something settles. Perhaps this is the final teaching of the stones. that knowledge does not always arrive as revelation. Sometimes it arrives as permission, permission to not know, permission to stand quietly within mystery and feel complete. Some knowledge remains whole only when it refuses explanation. The stones do not ask to be solved, they ask to be respected. And so we leave them as we found them, unchanged, unclaimed, breathing with the night. Mist returns, silence thickens, the circle fades back into the land, as though it was never separate from it at all. Perhaps the stones were never meant to speak, perhaps they were meant to listen and to teach us gently how to do the same. Marked by the moon, held by the earth, the circle waits, and we drift onward, carrying its quiet into sleep. It is said that power walks loudly, but fear walks ahead of it, clearing the path in silence. In the opening hush, a procession moves through fog so thick it seems to erase the land behind it. Lanterns sway like tired stars. Hooves strike earth that has already forgotten their sound. At the center, carried not by strength but by urgency, is an emperor whose breath feels shorter with every step forward. Qin Shi Huang does not look like a conqueror in this moment. He looks like a man listening for the end. The fog closes in as if the world itself is exhaling. Courtiers lower their eyes. Alchemists clutch scrolls close to their chests. No one speaks of death aloud, yet it walks beside them, unseen, patient, certain. It is said that this emperor unified the land of China with iron will and measured law. He stitched together warring states like fragments of a broken vessel, shaping a single realm from scattered ambitions. Roads aligned, scripts standardized, walls stretched across mountains like stone veins. History remembers him as the first emperor, the beginning of an age. But beneath the silence, another story breathes, a quieter one. Because even as Qin Shi Huang bound the world beneath his rule, time refused to kneel. And it was time, not rebellion, that terrified him most. Some believe his search for immortality began not in arrogance, but in dread. The dread of vanishing, of becoming dust like the nameless bones beneath his palaces, of losing the sharp clarity of being alive, awake, remembered. In forgotten corners of the earth, rulers have always chased eternity. But Qin Shi Huang chased it with a peculiar devotion. Not through prayer, but through experiment, through alchemy, through whispered promises carried by scholars who spoke of celestial substances and sacred elixirs. Scrolls arrived from distant regions, their ink still smelling of river reeds and mountain caves. They spoke of cinnabar, red as fresh blood, believed to hold the essence of life itself. They spoke of mercury, fluid and shining, a metal that moved like breath and never settled, mirroring the dream of endless motion. It is said that the emperor drank these elixirs, that he swallowed immortality as poison, trusting the words of men who claimed the stars could be distilled into liquid form. Mercury rivers glimmer faintly beneath sealed earth, not metaphor but design. His tomb, hidden deep beneath a star-marked mound, was said to contain entire landscapes, mountains carved from bronze, oceans shaped from flowing mercury, constellations set into the ceiling like a second sky, a world recreated underground, so the emperor might continue ruling even after breath abandoned his body. A perfect paradox. To fear death so deeply that one builds a kingdom for it. The chapter of his life unfolds like a slow lament, each decree, each expedition, each ritual performed in the hope of delay. Messengers were sent east toward the sea, searching for mythical islands where immortals were said to dwell. They never returned, or returned empty-handed, their voices trembling with apology. Some believe Qin Shi Huang never trusted them anyway, because deep down he may have known what all mortals know, but refused to accept. That time does not bargain. And so his fear hardened into control. Books were burned, scholars were silenced. Knowledge was shaped to serve order rather than wonder. History itself was trimmed, edited, narrowed, as if by mastering the past he might command the future. Yet the contradiction remained. A man who unified land could not unite with time. A ruler who commanded millions could not command a single extra breath. When death finally came, quietly, as it always does, it found an emperor surrounded by remedies, rituals, and walls of belief. His body failed far from the capital, on a journey meant to outrun decay. His attendants hid the truth, masking the scent of death with fish, afraid to let the empire feel the tremor of loss too soon. And then, silence. But Qin Shi Huang was not done building, because what followed was not a burial. It was a continuation. Beneath the soil near modern Xi'an, an underground realm took shape, not in haste, but in meticulous patience. Thousands of artisans shaped figures from clay, each one unique. Faces with different cheekbones, eyes, mouths. Soldiers who had never lived, yet somehow carried the weight of memory. The terracotta army does not feel like an army. It feels like an echo. They stand in endless rows, not advancing, not attacking, not guarding borders. They face outward, inward, everywhere and nowhere. They are not soldiers prepared for war. They are witnesses, thousands of faces guarding a single unanswered prayer. Perhaps the emperor believed that if enough eyes remained open, he might not have to close his own. Perhaps he believed that being remembered in such detail would substitute for living forever. Or perhaps, more quietly, the figures were never meant to protect him. Perhaps they were meant to keep him company. The emotional arc softens here, drifting away from power and into something tender. A man who commanded armies could not bear the thought of being alone. A ruler who shaped history feared the dark where no voice answers back. And so he filled it, with clay, with symbols, with replicas of the world he could not release. The tomb itself remains unopened, marked by the moon, guarded by law, sealed by caution and reverence. Modern scholars hesitate not from fear, but from respect, aware that opening such a chamber might release not curses, but truths we are not prepared to sit with. Inside, it is said, the mercury still flows, toxic, shining, eternal in motion, deadly to touch. The perfect symbol of the emperor's dream, immortality that destroys the vessel seeking it. Beneath the silence, the tomb breathes, not with life, with warning. Because Qin Shi Huang's story does not thunder like legend. It hums, it lingers, it reminds us that the desire to escape death can deepen its shadow, stretching it longer across the ground of our lives. He wanted to live forever. Instead, he built one of the most elaborate reminders that no one does. And yet, he is remembered, not as immortal, but as human, as a man who reached too far into the future and found only stillness waiting there. Perhaps that is the quiet mercy of his story, that immortality does not arrive through preservation of flesh or name, but through acceptance, through knowing when to stop building and allow the earth to close its hands around us. The tomb remains sealed. The emperor rests. The terracotta guardians stand, not alert, not weary, just present. And time moves on, gently, without triumph. Perhaps immortality lies not in living forever, but in accepting the stillness that eventually claims all names. Where memory fades, silence does not accuse, it simply holds. And so the story exhales, and the night deepens, and the emperor at last is still. It is said that some words are born unfinished, not broken, not lost, only waiting. In the opening hush, we kneel in a desert where the sand has learned the art of keeping secrets. The sun has already moved on. The heat has softened into memory, and beneath the dust, wrapped in linen, tucked into clay jars, hidden not in fear but in patience, a fragment rests, a sentence without an ending. Ink fades into papyrus, papyrus breathes into soil, and soil remembers longer than any empire ever could. This is not a gospel that arrived with trumpets or banners. It did not seek crowds. It did not ask to be carried into the light. It waited instead for silence, for hands gentle enough to unroll it slowly, for eyes willing to look inward rather than upward. Whispers tell us that these texts were never meant to argue, they were meant to awaken. In forgotten corners of the earth, long before doctrine hardened into walls, there were voices who spoke softly about knowing rather than believing, about finding rather than following, about a divine presence not seated on distant thrones, but folded quietly inside the human breath. These voices came to be called Gnostic, from gnosis, meaning knowing, not knowledge gathered from authority, but recognition rising from within, like remembering a dream you did not know you had forgotten. The desert kept their words. For centuries, their teachings lived only as shadows in other people's arguments, condemned, dismissed, summarized by those who feared them. We knew of them mostly through the accusations of their opponents, described as heretics, disturbers, wanderers away from the light. And yet, the light they walked away from was never the light itself. It was the glare, the kind that blinds as easily as it reveals. The chapter unfolds slowly, as scrolls are imagined being unrolled, not hurried, not explained, but allowed to breathe. Their language does not command, it invites. It does not declare truth. It gestures toward it, then steps aside. These Gospels speak of Christ, yes, but not as a distant ruler crowned in certainty. They speak of him as a mirror, a doorway, a reminder of something already present. The kingdom is inside you, one text whispers, and it is outside you. Not a place to conquer, not a future to wait for, but a state of awareness, delicate, private, easily disturbed by noise. The Gospel of Thomas offers sayings without narrative, like stones placed deliberately with space between them. No birth story, no crucifixion, only fragments, invitations, parables stripped to their quiet bones. The Gospel of Mary speaks through a woman's voice, describing visions dismissed by men who feared their intimacy. Her knowing was not taught. It was revealed gently in stillness. The Gospel of Philip speaks of mystery and union, of the sacred kiss not as scandal but as symbol, knowledge passing through closeness, not hierarchy. These are not texts meant to be proclaimed from platforms. They are meant to be leaned into. The narrative focus drifts here, not toward conflict but toward contrast. Public belief versus private flame, doctrine as architecture versus knowing as breath. Early Christianity did not emerge as a single river. It rose as many streams. Some flowed outward, building communities, laws, rituals. Others turned inward, seeking the divine spark believed to be buried beneath layers of forgetting. The Gnostic path did not deny the sacred. It located it differently, not above the world, but within it. Not mediated by institutions, but encountered in silence. Not owned by crowds, but trusted to individuals. This made it dangerous, not because it incited rebellion, but because it did not require permission. Contradictions appear here like overlapping shadows at dusk. Church doctrine emphasized shared belief, unity, clarity. Gnostic texts emphasized inner experience, ambiguity, personal revelation. One needed structure, the other needed stillness. Neither shouts the other down in this telling. They simply exist, side by side, uneasy, unresolved. As centuries passed, councils gathered, decisions hardened, canon was chosen, what would be read aloud, what would be copied, what would be hidden, burned, or forgotten. And so these Gospels walked away from the light. Not chased, not destroyed completely, but set aside. Their words became rumors. Their ideas survived as whispers threaded through mystics, poets, and solitary seekers who felt something missing in certainty. Until one day, in 1945, near the town of Nag Hammadi in Egypt, a farmer uncovered a jar in the earth. Inside, wrapped and waiting, were 13 leather-bound codices. More than 50 texts sleeping together in darkness. The desert exhaled, and the fragments returned. But even then they did not rush forward. Scholars handled them carefully. Translations took decades. The world listened, but not loudly, because these texts do not reward speed. They ask something quieter, to sit, to reflect, to allow contradiction without resolution. Emotion shifts gently here, from intrigue to intimacy. Reading these words feels less like learning something new and more like being trusted with something old. The Gospels do not insist you agree. They ask whether you recognize. They speak of a hidden divinity, not hidden in shame, but veiled for protection. A flame that dims when exposed too harshly, a truth that withdraws when demanded. Beneath the silence, there is compassion. The idea that not everyone must walk the same path, that some souls awaken best in crowds while others need solitude, that some truths bloom only when the world grows quiet enough to stop staring. Perhaps this is why these Gospels remain unsettling even now. They do not replace belief, they bypass it. They suggest that salvation is not granted but remembered, that the divine does not descend, it stirs. And this stirs fear, because systems can manage belief, they cannot manage awakening. And yet, the texts themselves are not defiant, they are tender. They speak of light, but not the kind that blinds. They speak of knowledge, but not the kind that dominates. They speak of Christ not as ruler, but as guide, pointing inward then fading from view, as if to say, you must walk the rest alone. The chapter begins to close as the scrolls are gently rolled back up. Their words do not cling. They do not insist on the final word. They retreat by choice. Perhaps this is the greatest misunderstanding about the Gnostic Gospels, that they were lost. Perhaps they were simply waiting for a world loud enough to need quiet, structured enough to crave mystery, certain enough to remember the value of doubt. Some truths withdraw from noise, not because they are weak, but because they are sacred. They remain whole only when approached in silence. As the desert night settles again, the jar returns to darkness in the imagination. The fragment remains unfinished, the sentence does not resolve, and that is its gift. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some light only reveals itself when we turn away from glare and allow the eyes to soften. And so this gospel does not end. It walks away, not into shadow, but into the inner chamber where breath slows, where memory fades, where the listener is no longer being taught, but quietly remembered, marked by the moon, held by silence, waiting, still. It is said that some maps are not meant to guide the feet, but to unsettle the mind. In the opening hush, a sheet of parchment drifts into view, edges softened by age, surface marked with salt-stained ink. It does not arrive with ceremony. It simply appears, as if lifted gently from the dark by an unseen tide. The room is quiet. A single candle burns low, and on the skin of this ancient page, the world looks unfamiliar. Not wrong, just early. This is the map of Piri Reis. It floats before us like a dream, remembered out of sequence, coastlines curving with calm confidence, islands breathing where none were supposed to exist, continents hinted at through lines that feel certain of themselves. There is no hesitation in the ink, no apology. The hand that drew this world moved as though guided by memory rather than discovery. The sea is everywhere. Waves curl along the margins of the page, dotted with ships that sail eternal waters. Winds are personified, blowing with faces carved in calm expression. Monsters linger at the edges, not in warning, but in tradition. Guardians of the unknown, placed there as if to say, beyond this point wonder deepens, and yet something stirs uneasily in the viewer. Because some of these shores should not be here, not yet. The map bears a date, 1513, a time when much of the world was still wrapped in rumor, and yet South America stretches downward with uncanny familiarity. Coastlines align too well, proportions whisper of precision rather than guesswork. And in the southern reaches, there are shapes that some believe resemble Antarctica, not frozen but bare, as though remembered from an age before ice claimed it. The map refuses to obey the world as we were taught it unfolded, and so we pause. Because this chapter is not about proof, it is about presence, about the unsettling calm of impossible accuracy. Piri Reis himself does not appear as a mystic or prophet. He was an Ottoman admiral, a sailor, a collector of charts, a man of tides and horizons, not temples and visions. In his own notes, written modestly along the margins, he tells us how he made the map, from older sources, from Portuguese charts, from Arab maps, from fragments gathered like shells along the shore of history. One note mentions maps drawn in the time of Alexander the Great. Another speaks of charts captured from Columbus himself. The words are simple, almost careless, and yet they open a door. Because if this map was stitched together from older maps, then the question drifts upward like mist. How old were those maps? Whispers tell us that knowledge does not always move forward in straight lines. Sometimes it spirals, sometimes it sinks, only to rise again centuries later, mistaken for miracle or fraud. Perhaps Piri Reis was not inventing anything at all. Perhaps he was remembering. Beneath the silence, the idea begins to breathe, that there may have been other ages of exploration, long before sails caught modern wind, that ancient civilizations, now dust and echo, may have known the shape of the world more fully than we assume, not through satellites or instruments, but through patience, through generations of observation, through coastal memory passed mouth to ear, map to map, hand to hand. The ocean has always been the first archive. Before paper there were currents, before writing there were stars, before borders there were shorelines etched into human longing. Consider the possibility, gently without insistence, that ancient mariners traced the earth not to conquer it, but to know it. That they sailed farther than history credits them for, guided by celestial patterns and stories older than any empire. That their charts survived not as complete volumes, but as fragments, copied, recopied, misunderstood, preserved in monasteries, libraries, private collections. By the time Piri Reis gathered them, their origins were already veiled. And so the map arrives to us like a palimpsest of forgotten breaths. Scholars have argued over it for decades. Some dismiss its strange accuracy as coincidence. Others insist the southern shapes are misread coastlines. Still others lean closer, tracing curves with reverent fingers, sensing something that resists dismissal. But this chapter does not choose sides. It listens, because certainty is loud, and this map is quiet. It does not shout its secret. It does not explain itself. It simply exists, calm, composed, unconcerned with modern timelines. Emotion settles here into quiet wonder, not excitement, not fear. Wonder, the kind that feels like floating between waking and sleep, when the mind loosens its grip and allows contradiction to sit beside it without discomfort. What if knowledge can arrive too early? What if truth, when it appears before its time, is not celebrated, but ignored, shelved, labeled error? History is full of such moments, ideas dismissed as heresy, later embraced as foundation, observations mocked as imagination, later named discovery. What we call progress often depends less on truth itself, and more on whether the world is ready to receive it. Perhaps the Piri Reis map is not wrong. Perhaps it was simply early, and so it drifted, misunderstood, half-seen, until it resurfaced centuries later, when eyes trained in certainty finally noticed its quiet defiance. The map does not accuse us of ignorance. It invites humility, because it suggests that our picture of the past may be thinner than we believe, that there may have been rises and falls of knowledge we no longer remember, that some civilizations reached further, saw clearer, then vanished, leaving only faint impressions behind. Dust, echo, spiral. The map's ink fades at the edges, but its questions deepen. How many truths were written down, then lost, then rediscovered without their stories? How many insights arrived before language knew how to frame them? How many maps were drawn for a world that would forget how to read them? As the candle burns lower, the parchment seems to darken, retreating into shadow. The coastlines soften, the monsters blur, the ships freeze in eternal sail. The map does not ask to be solved, it asks to be held, to be contemplated not as evidence, but as memory. Perhaps the greatest mystery of the Piri Reis map is not what it shows, but what it implies, that human knowledge may not be a straight ascent from darkness into light, but a long tide, rising and falling, revealing and concealing again and again. Perhaps civilizations before us reached moments of clarity we have yet to reclaim. Perhaps they learned how to see and then forgot. As the map fades back into the dark, folded gently, returned to silence, it leaves behind a single lingering question, soft enough to carry into sleep. What other truths arrived before humanity learned how to see them? The candle goes out, the sea breathes on, and somewhere in the quiet between certainty and doubt, the world waits, still unfinished. It is said that before the gods learned how to speak, the earth learned how to breathe. In the opening hush, we climb a narrow path cut into the side of a sacred mountain. Stone beneath bare feet is cool, worn smooth by centuries of seeking. The air thins as we rise. Laurel leaves whisper against one another, stirred by a wind that seems to arrive from inside the rock itself. Somewhere ahead, hidden within a fold of stone and shadow, a chamber waits. Delphi. Not a city of answers, but a place where questions learned how to soften. At the heart of the sanctuary, beyond columns and offerings, beyond names etched into marble, there is a cleft in the earth. From it, a faint vapor rises, warm, mineral, breathing. The ground exhales as though it remembers something ancient and cannot keep it contained. Here, the oracle does not stand. She sits. The Pythia rests upon a simple tripod above the fissure, wrapped in white, crowned with leaves. She does not arrive with certainty. She arrives with surrender. Her eyes are unfocused. Her breath slows. The world narrows to rhythm. Inhale, exhale, until her voice becomes less her own and more a passageway. What emerges is not prophecy as command. It is echo. Words arrive broken, bent, shaped by trance and breath rather than logic. Syllables tremble. Sentences refuse completion. Meaning drifts like smoke, never settling long enough to be seized. It is said that kings came here expecting clarity. They left with riddles. The oracle does not instruct armies where to march. She does not guarantee victory or failure. She offers instead a mirror, angled just enough that certainty slips out of view. Know thyself, the temple walls whisper, not as comfort, as warning. The narrative deepens slowly, like a descent into a cave lit by flickering flame. Delphi was believed to be the navel of the world, the center point marked by a stone called the Omphalos. From here, the gods were said to listen more closely. But perhaps it was not the gods who listened, perhaps it was humanity. Pilgrims arrived from every direction, generals, poets, farmers, mothers. They brought offerings not to buy truth, but to honor mystery. Gold gleamed softly beside simple clay. Questions were written on tablets, then spoken aloud, then released into air. And the oracle answered, not with conclusions, but with openings. One king was told he would destroy a great empire if he went to war. He did. It was his own. Another was warned that crossing a river would bring ruin. He crossed. The ruin followed. History often remembers these moments as trickery, as cruel ambiguity. But beneath the silence, another interpretation breathes. The oracle did not lie. She also did not decide. Her words were shaped like thresholds, places where meaning required the listener to step forward alone. Power here was never fixed. It flowed. It slipped through fingers clenched too tightly around expectation. It rewarded those who approached with humility and unsettled those who demanded certainty. Some believe the Pythia inhaled intoxicating vapors rising from the earth, gases that altered consciousness, loosening the boundary between thought and sensation. Others argue the trance was ritual, learned, cultivated through fasting, rhythm, and sacred repetition. The chapter does not choose, because the truth may be less important than the effect. What mattered was not how the oracle spoke, but how people listened. Her voice carried the texture of breath. It rose and fell like waves against stone. It did not seek authority. It did not impose direction. It invited interpretation. And interpretation is a burden. It requires responsibility. When guidance is unclear, choice becomes visible. When answers dissolve into riddle, intention reveals itself. Perhaps this is why Delphi endured for so long, because it did not remove doubt. It sanctified it. Beneath the silence of the chamber, beneath the murmured prayers and rustle of robes, something profound unfolded again and again. Humans confronting the fact that even divine guidance does not absolve them of decision. The oracle did not command. She reflected. Emotion drifts here, away from frustration and toward acceptance. The acceptance that not knowing is not failure. That uncertainty can be a form of care. That clarity, when forced, can become cruelty. In forgotten corners of the earth, many cultures once honored ambiguity. Dreams were listened to, omens were weighed gently, silence was allowed to speak. Delphi stands as a reminder of that older posture, when humans did not demand answers, but asked how to listen. As centuries passed, Delphi's voice softened. Empires rose and fell. Rome came, curious and reverent, then confident and controlling. Questions changed. The world grew louder. The oracle's breath became harder to hear. Eventually, the fissure fell quiet. The vapors ceased. The sanctuary emptied. The Pythia's seat remained, stone waiting for a voice that would not return. But perhaps the oracle did not disappear. Perhaps she dispersed. Perhaps her true gift was never the words spoken in that chamber, but the way those words taught humanity to sit with uncertainty. Because even now, long after Delphi's stones have crumbled, we still seek answers as if they might arrive clean and complete. We still hunger for prophecy that removes doubt, for guidance that eliminates responsibility. And yet, something in us remembers that some truths arrive only as breath, that some wisdom refuses to harden into instruction, that some guidance is meant to be felt, not followed. The final moments of this chapter slow into stillness. The chamber empties, the laurel leaves dry and fall. Dust gathers where offerings once gleamed. The fissure closes, or perhaps simply rests. The oracle fades, not into absence, but into atmosphere. Into the pause before decision, into the silence after a question is asked, into the space where meaning must be made, not received. Perhaps this is the comfort Delphi leaves us, that not knowing is not abandonment, that uncertainty can be sacred, that guidance need not be clear to be true. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, not for answers, but for ourselves. And so the mountain exhales one last time. The night deepens, and in the quiet that remains, we find not prophecy, but permission to rest within the mystery. It is said that the earth is not only a home, but a keeper of bones and bells, of vanished prayers, of cities pressed into soil until they become indistinguishable from rock. A keeper of silence so deep it feels like velvet. And somewhere beneath hills, where roots weave their slow cathedral and stones hold their breath, a sealed chamber waits. No footstep has disturbed it, no lantern has tasted its air, no human eye has measured the shape of its darkness. In the opening hush, imagine a hillside under moonlight. The grass sways like quiet water, crickets sing softly, then pause, as if something older is listening. The world above seems ordinary, stars, wind, the gentle turning of night. But beneath the silence, there is a door, not a door of wood or iron, but a boundary made of intention, a threshold designed not to welcome, but to endure. The kind of sealed entrance that does not simply hide what lies behind it, it preserves it, like a breath held for thousands of years. And we begin with a question that arrives like a whisper against stone. Are some doors closed by accident or by design? Some believe the greatest treasures on earth glitter under glass in museums, laid out beneath lights. But in forgotten corners of history, the most sacred things were never meant to be displayed. They were meant to be placed into darkness and left there, untouched, so their meaning could remain whole. A tomb is not only a container, it is a decision. In ancient worlds, burial was not always an ending. It was a continuation, a careful arrangement of the unseen, a way of sending someone across a threshold while keeping the living safe from the pull of that crossing. Seals, curses, traps, sacred inscriptions, these were not just threats. They were boundaries. They were respect. They were caution. Tonight, we do not break those seals. We do not storm the chamber with tools and certainty. We only approach the idea of it, slowly, as if walking through a temple where the floor is made of silence. In China, the earth has kept one of the most famous unopened chambers of all, the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. Above ground, his terracotta guardians stand in endless rows, faces different, eyes fixed in patient watch. But the central tomb itself remains closed, deep beneath a star-marked mound. It is said that within, rivers of mercury flow like liquid moonlight through miniature landscapes, reflecting a world recreated underground. Mercury, that strange metal that moves like breath and cannot be grasped, a symbol of immortality and poison at once. The chamber is believed to be sealed not only by walls, but by danger, by the very dream that built it. Scholars hesitate there, and the hesitation feels almost sacred, not because they fear curses, because they fear losing the integrity of what has slept undisturbed. Because once a tomb is opened, it begins to die a second death, exposed to air, light, bacteria, time. The mystery becomes a specimen, the sacred becomes an object, and so the chamber waits. In Egypt, there are other sealed places, not all famous, not all named, but hidden in valleys and cliffs where sand flows like oceanic tide. Some tombs were plundered in antiquity, others were discovered by modern hands. Yet still, there are chambers believed to remain unopened, tucked into bedrock, their entrances disguised by collapsed stone or deliberate concealment. In those ancient worlds, tombs were built like riddles, false corridors, hidden doors, spiral passages that turn the mind as much as the body, not simply to protect gold, but to protect a journey, to keep the dead from being dragged back into the noise of the living, to keep the living from being pulled into the realm of the dead too soon. It is said that tomb robbers once moved like shadows through these landscapes, driven by hunger and greed. And yet, even their footsteps, their torches, their chisel marks, even those are now history's fingerprints. But the tomb we are speaking of tonight is different. It is not robbed, it is not broken, it is not even seen. It is the tomb that no footstep has disturbed. Perhaps it exists in a real place, beneath a specific hill, behind a specific wall, under a particular stretch of desert where the wind erases tracks within minutes. Or perhaps it exists as an idea, the last untouched chamber, the last pure silence, the last sealed breath of an ancient world. And as we drift deeper into this meditation, the chapter becomes less about any one grave and more about restraint, because restraint is rare. We live in an age that opens everything. We unwrap, we excavate, we expose. We believe that to know is to reveal, that light is always kinder than darkness. But the old world did not always agree. In forgotten corners of the earth, darkness was not merely absence. It was a sacred element, a shelter, a womb for transformation. Some mysteries were protected not because they were shameful, but because they were powerful, like seeds. A seed does not bloom if you tear it open too soon. It must remain closed, buried, hidden, held by soil and time. Only then does it become what it was meant to be. Perhaps the unopened tomb is history's seed, not meant for our hands, not meant for our eyes, not yet, or perhaps never. Consider how easily we mistake access for wisdom. A chamber can be opened and still remain misunderstood. Gold can be lifted into daylight and still teach nothing. A mummy can be unwrapped, and yet the life that once lived inside that body stays unreachable, veiled beyond touch. So what do we truly seek when we seek unopened graves? Proof, wealth, fame, or communion with the past? There is an old contradiction here. We want to honor the ancient world, and yet our curiosity sometimes becomes a kind of intrusion. The tomb, sealed and untouched, invites a different posture, a softer one. Instead of taking, we pause. Instead of conquering the unknown, we bow to it. Emotion settles now into respectful stillness, a calm acceptance that not everything must be pulled into the light to be real. The unopened chamber becomes a symbol of humility, a reminder that the past does not belong to us entirely, that some parts of history remain sacred precisely because they remain out of reach. And yet, the imagination wanders. It always does. We picture what might be inside, not greedily, not violently, but with quiet wonder. A sarcophagus carved with star patterns, amulets placed like small moons along a chest, a bowl of dried offerings, painted walls still bright in the dark, colors preserved by centuries of sealed air. A final message etched into stone, not for us, but for whatever listens beyond death. We imagine the air inside that tomb, ancient, untouched, carrying the breath of a world that vanished. We imagine opening the door and feeling time itself drift outward like dust. And then we stop, because imagining is enough. Perhaps the true treasure is not what lies inside, but what the sealed door creates in us. A space for reverence, a pause, a recognition that mystery is not a problem to solve, but a presence to keep. In this sense, the unopened tomb becomes a kind of oracle, silent yet instructive. It teaches us that the unknown can be sacred, that not knowing can be honest, that absence can hold meaning. Beneath the silence, doors remain closed, not by chance but by design. Design by ancient builders who understood the fragility of the sacred. Design by nature too, which buries and preserves with the slow patience of stone and root. Design by time, which hides what it cannot yet release. And perhaps designed by something deeper still, the quiet law that says, not everything is for you. The chapter begins to fade now, like a lantern carried away down a long corridor. The hillside above remains calm under moonlight. The stars do not shift. The wind continues to comb the grass. No one knows the exact place where the sealed chamber rests, or perhaps many know and choose not to disturb it. The earth holds it the way the sea holds drowned cities, gently, without announcement, and we, listening in the dark, are left with a final reflection that feels like a soft closing of hands. Perhaps mystery itself is the treasure. Not the gold that might glitter inside, not the artifacts that might be displayed, not the headlines that might be written, but the sealed silence, the untouched breath, the sacred restraint that keeps something whole by refusing to reveal it. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and some chambers remain quiet so we can learn how to stop knocking. Marked by the moon, the hill sleeps on, and beneath it, so does the tomb. It is said that some books are not written to be understood, they are written to be kept. In the opening hush, a candle burns beside a wooden table worn smooth by generations of careful hands. The room is quiet in the way old rooms are quiet, as if even the dust has learned to lower its voice. Beyond the window, night gathers its velvet, and the moon lays a pale ribbon across the floor. And there, on the table, rests a manuscript that feels like it was never meant to be found. Its cover is plain. Its pages are thick and pale, like bone washed by time. When you place your fingertips upon it, the parchment seems to hold a faint chill, the temperature of long closed cupboards, of forgotten chests, of history held in breath. You open it slowly, not with urgency, not with certainty, only with a quiet reverence, as though unsealing a chamber. And the first thing you notice is that the words are not words. They are symbols, curling, looping, repeating in patterns that feel intentional, yet unreachable. They resemble letters, but refuse to belong to any known tongue. They march across the page with calm discipline, as if they know exactly what they mean. But when you look closer, the meaning does not arrive. No sound rises in your mind, no translation forms, only silence. This is the Voynich manuscript, a book that has drifted through centuries like a sealed bottle on an oceanic tide, carrying a message without a clear sender and waiting for a reader who never came. Whispers tell us that it surfaced into modern awareness through the hands of a collector named Wilfrid Voynich, who acquired it in the early 20th century. But the manuscript itself feels older than discovery. It carries the weight of time without revealing its origin. It is believed to have been created somewhere in Europe, perhaps in the 15th century, though even that is only a soft estimate, a lantern held against fog. The pages are filled with strange drawings, plants that do not exist, leaves shaped like unfamiliar moons, roots curling like sleeping serpents, flowers blooming in impossible geometry, petals arranged not by botany, but by dream. Some plants seem stitched together from pieces of real ones, as if the artist was recalling nature from memory and misremembering on purpose. There are diagrams too, wheels within wheels, star-marked circles, spirals that pull the eye inward, tiny naked figures, women perhaps, bathing in green pools connected by strange pipes like an inner anatomy of the earth. And in the margins, the same looping script continues, steady and calm, never breaking character, never admitting doubt. It is a language without memory, a tongue that offers no known alphabet, no recognizable grammar, no anchor to hold the mind in place. And yet, it does not look like nonsense. It looks like devotion. The ink is consistent. The lines are confident. The handwriting flows as if written by someone who knew exactly what they were saying and expected, fully expected, to be understood. This is where the mystery begins to deepen, because most hoaxes carry impatience. They show cracks, they tire, they drift into inconsistency. The Voynich manuscript does not tire. It continues for page after page, like a prayer repeated in perfect rhythm. Some believe it is an encoded text, a cipher meant to hide knowledge from unworthy eyes, a secret manual of alchemy, medicine, astronomy, heresy, something dangerous enough to be veiled. If so, the manuscript becomes a gate with no key, locked not by iron, but by intellect. Others believe it is a constructed language, a private tongue invented by one mind or a small circle, meant to hold ideas too delicate for ordinary speech, a hidden chamber of meaning. Others still suggest it could be a form of glossolalia, writing born from trance, the hand moving as the mind drifts elsewhere, producing symbols that feel sacred even if they cannot be translated. A kind of sleep language, recorded while half awake. And then there are those who whisper the simplest possibility, that it is meaningless, that it is a beautiful emptiness, an elaborate performance of language without content. But even that possibility carries its own sadness, because why would someone devote such care to silence disguised as speech? The chapter drifts from curiosity into something softer. Loneliness. Not the loneliness of the reader, though that is real, the feeling of staring at a page that will not open itself, but the loneliness of the manuscript itself, a message without a reader, a voice speaking into a chamber that never echoes back. Imagine the one who wrote it, a person hunched over candlelight, dipping a quill into ink, shaping every symbol with attention. Perhaps they pause to grind pigments, to paint their strange plants with muted greens and faded blues. Perhaps they believed their work would be passed hand to hand, cherished, used. Perhaps they believed their words would save someone, teach someone, heal someone. Perhaps they wrote for a future that never arrived. Or perhaps they wrote for someone very specific, a single reader, a single pair of eyes, a single mind meant to understand. And if that reader never came, the manuscript becomes a kind of unanswered letter. History is full of letters like that. Tablets whose language no one remembers, inscriptions that outlast their cultures, songs that survive without anyone knowing what the lyrics once meant. But the Voynich manuscript is different because it feels intimate, like it is speaking directly to you, and yet refusing to speak in any language you know. It is like being offered a hand through a veil. You can see its shape, you can feel its presence, but you cannot touch it. For over a century, scholars, cryptographers, linguists, and dreamers have tried to read it. Patterns have been counted, frequencies analyzed. The text has been compared to Latin, Hebrew, Arabic, and countless other tongues. Codes have been proposed, broken, dismissed, proposed again. Each attempt feels like someone knocking gently at a door, and the door remains closed, not in anger, in stillness. Beneath the silence, another possibility begins to breathe, one that feels less like a puzzle and more like a parable. What if the manuscript is complete precisely because it remains unread? What if its purpose is not to communicate, but to exist as a vessel of mystery, a sacred object, not a solved one? Some truths, after all, lose their power when exposed. Some symbols are meant to be carried, not decoded. Some languages are meant to be felt, the way music is felt, rather than translated into sharp meaning. When you cannot read the words, you begin to notice other things. The patience of the strokes, the calm repetition, the way each page seems to breathe in its own rhythm. The manuscript becomes less like a book and more like a mirror, reflecting the reader's longing. It shows you how desperately the mind wants closure, how urgently it seeks to name what it sees, how uncomfortable it is with a mystery that refuses to become a lesson. And yet, in the quiet of night, there is a strange comfort in that refusal, because the Voynich manuscript does not demand you solve it. It invites you to sit beside it, to look, to wonder, to accept that some things remain veiled, not because we are unworthy, but because mystery is part of the world's design. The drawings of impossible plants begin to feel less like failed botany and more like a garden of the inner world. Flora of imagination, cultivated in a place where no sun reaches, where only thought and dream can grow. The star-marked diagrams begin to feel less like astronomy and more like the movement of the mind, spirals of attention, cycles of memory, wheels of time turning without names. Even the small bathing figures, so often debated, begin to feel like symbols of transformation, of washing away identity, of dissolving the self into something softer, something unreadable. Perhaps the manuscript is not hiding information from us. Perhaps it is offering a reminder that not everything is meant to be turned into certainty. As the chapter begins to close, the candle has burned lower. Wax pools like pale water. Shadows deepen in the corners of the room. The manuscript lies open, its strange script continuing across the page, unbothered by your inability to understand. It does not grow impatient. It does not change itself for you. It simply remains what it is. A voice from a time without a clear address, a language without memory, a song with no known ears, and perhaps in that there is a kind of peace. Because the manuscript does not ask to be conquered by meaning. It asks to be respected by silence. You close it gently. The cover meets the page with a soft sigh, like a door returning to its frame. The room grows quieter still, and in the final reflection, the mystery does not resolve. It deepens. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was never meant to be read. Perhaps some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and some do not echo at all, because their purpose is simply to remain. Marked by the moon, the Voynich manuscript sleeps again, and we too drift towards sleep, carrying with us the gentle sorrow of an unread message, and the strange sacred comfort of not knowing. It is said that there comes a moment when even history grows weary, not in defeat, not in failure, but in fulfillment. A moment when the weight of remembering becomes too heavy for the world to carry, and so the world does what it has always done with what it loves most deeply. It lays it down. In the opening hush, imagine a chamber that does not exist on any map. No door leads to it, no path remembers the way. It is not carved from stone, nor hidden beneath earth, nor sealed beneath water. It is formed instead from quiet, a space shaped by forgetting. The air here is cool and gentle. Dust drifts slowly, not falling but hovering, as if unsure whether it is time to settle. There are no walls, yet the space feels held. There is no ceiling, yet the darkness curves softly overhead, like a night sky without stars. This is the final chamber, not a place where history ends, but where it rests. You arrive here without walking, without effort, without intention. The echoes of all the stories before drift in with you, faint and unhurried. A library that learned to sleep, a city swallowed by the sea, stones that listened instead of speaking, a ruler who chased forever and found stillness, gospels that withdrew into silence, maps drawn too early, oracles who answered with breath. Tombs left unopened, manuscripts unread. They do not arrive as facts, they arrive as feelings, like half-remembered dreams brushing past one another in the dark. History does not stand upright here, it reclines. It loosens its grip on names and dates and certainty. It exhales centuries of effort, the urge to be known, to be explained, to be preserved perfectly. In this chamber, preservation is no longer the goal. Mercy is. It is said that forgetting is not always loss. Sometimes it is kindness. Imagine the world if nothing faded, if every sorrow remained sharp, if every failure stayed vivid, if every civilization remembered itself forever, unable to let go. The weight would be unbearable, memory would become a prison, and so history, like the human mind, learns to rest. It releases what no longer needs to be carried, not all at once, gently, layer by layer. Here stories are not erased, they are softened, edges blur, harsh lines dissolve. What remains is essence, the feeling beneath the facts, the echo beneath the voice. Beneath the silence, the chamber hums with a low, oceanic rhythm, like breath slowed to its most natural pace, like the earth dreaming of itself. There are no exhibits here, no plaques, no labels, only impressions, a sense of firelight on stone, a feeling of water closing over marble, the quiet ache of words written and never read, the calm relief of a door left unopened. History does not ask to be remembered precisely, it asks to be remembered gently. Some believe this chamber exists in us, that when we fall asleep we enter it briefly, that the mind, tired of ordering the world, loosens its hold and allows fragments to drift. Images without context, stories without conclusion, symbols freed from explanation. This is not confusion, this is rest. In forgotten corners of the earth, elders once understood this. They did not insist on complete histories. They passed down stories that shifted slightly with each telling, not because they were careless, but because they knew rigidity kills meaning. A story that cannot bend eventually breaks. A memory that cannot fade becomes a wound. and so forgetting became a sacred act, a veil drawn not to hide truth, but to protect it from being overhandled. In this final chamber, even the idea of truth grows quiet. It no longer argues for itself. It no longer needs defense. It settles into something softer, wisdom without urgency. The civilizations we have visited no longer stand apart. They mingle here, indistinct, their edges blending like colors in dusk. Atlantis does not argue with Alexandria. Delphi does not correct the Voynich manuscript. The terracotta soldiers lay down their watch. The stones at Stonehenge lean closer together. All of them sleep, and in their sleep they are whole. The listener feels something change now, a loosening behind the eyes, a heaviness in the limbs. Questions slow, curiosity softens. The need to understand gives way to the permission to simply be. This is the gift of the final chamber, not answers, rest, the realization that the past does not need us to solve it in order to matter, that some stories remain alive precisely because they are unfinished. That mystery is not a flaw in history, it is its breathing space. Perhaps the greatest illusion we carry is that remembering everything honors the past. Perhaps instead, honoring the past sometimes means letting it sleep. Where memory fades, there is no betrayal. There is trust. Trust that what mattered will surface again if needed. Trust that what remains hidden is not angry, not lost, just quiet. Trust that history knows when it has said enough. Marked by the moon, the chamber dims further. The echoes thin. One by one, the fragments settle into stillness, like embers cooling beneath ash. Nothing is gone. Everything is resting. And you too are allowed to rest now. You do not need to carry these stories any further tonight. You do not need to remember their names or details. They will remain, speaking softly in the dark, long after sleep takes you. Perhaps this is where history always wanted to lead us, not toward mastery, but toward peace. The chamber closes without a sound, not locking, not sealing, simply existing beyond effort. And as the final light fades, there is no ending, only a gentle quiet, only the sense that some stories never stop speaking. They simply learn how to whisper, and in that whisper, history falls asleep.